leave you with one more thought. You know, we all like to occasionally drop a name, don't we? Think about it. If you meet someone famous, or if you're remembered by someone famous, or someone famous knows you, let's be honest. We can try to be, like I said, super humble and say, oh, it doesn't really matter. It matters. If you met Donald Trump or one of the presidents, you'd be talking about it all day long and for years to come, right? Because it makes you feel special. It makes you feel important. It makes you feel known. Well, that happened to Anna and I about 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago. We knew we were going to start this church, and I began to think about all the pastors I know. And I began to call them up and say, hey, would you be my friend? Not really. They were already my friend. I said, would you be my pastor? And can I be accountable to you? Can I call you for encouragement? God forbid I do anything wrong. I'm not going to. But can I call you to correct me if I need to be corrected? And not one of them said no. I called about 5 or 6 of them, and they said yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, we'd be glad to. We're so happy. You're going to be successful, and man, we're going to be praying for you. Well, there was one of those pastors that's kind of famous. He started out as a missionary to Mexico, and then he ended up doing concerts all over Mexico, and then he did his big concert in Azteca Stadium in Mexico City, and there was 100,000 people there. And then he's been in other cities in Latin America, and he's had concerts where there was lines that were over a mile long. His name is Marcos Witt, and he was my music teacher growing up. And he worked at the church I used to work out, and then he was sent out, and then he would come back occasionally. He'd come back every year to visit. And every time he'd come back to visit, he never changed. It was amazing. He was always friendly. He never forgot your name. And I even remember the way he treated my parents. I don't know if you remember this, Mom. I don't know where my dad went. There he is. I don't know if you remember this, Dad, but every time Mark would say hi to you or he would talk to me about you guys, he'd say, how's Pete? How's Rosalind doing? And he admired my parents because of their children. He was our teacher. And he was always an admirer of people, which made me and makes me believe that he's a servant leader. He was always watching people to see what they said, what they did, and then he would try to better himself. You see, he wasn't just a gifted man that can sing. Yes, he can do that, but it was like everybody he treats, he wants to treat them right and properly. And he always treated my parents that way, and he'd always compliment them on us, their children. So anyway, I called up Marcos and I said, hey man, you've heard from Matt that we're starting a church. He said, yeah, absolutely. You're going to do great. I said, is there any way Anna and I can meet you in Houston just for a cup of coffee and just share our vision with you and have you pray for us? He said, sure. Let me get with my people and we'll call you back and we'll make it happen. He's got a lot of people. So we got up there to Houston and we were sitting in the Starbucks and there comes Marcos and Miriam. They walk in, and I could tell he was tired. Guy travels the world. But as soon as we began talking, he lit up like a light bulb. You know what the first thing he asked me? And it makes me cry when I think about it. He says, how are your kids? A guy that travels the world, millions of people following him, he says, Ted, how are your kids? And I want to ask you that question today. If you're a parent, how are your kids? We work so hard. We do what we do for our kids. We do it for our friends. Man, if you could sit down with any leader, think of the most important, the richest, whoever you esteem highly. Think of them. You know what it boils down to? If they're the real deal, it's their family, number one, and it's their friends. And if they get in a hard time, you know who they're calling? They're calling their friends. And if you're going to make it in this life, you need some good friends. And you got to take care of your family. And if you're working for anything else but that, God help us today, because it's meaningless. One day we're going to be gone. One day you're going to be gone. What are they going to say? What are your kids going to say? What is your spouse going to say? What are your friends going to say? That's the conversation Jesus was having with his disciples. You see? That's what it's about. Why don't you stand to your feet? I want to pray for you. I want to pray for me.